It is 7:15 now. Emergency legislation should be passed to ensure that any Albanian arriving in Britain can be refused asylum, and anyone claiming they've been a victim of human trafficking can be taken home. That is the call being made in a letter to the Prime Minister by 50 Conservative MPs, led by David Davis, the Conservative MP for Alton Price and Howden, former Cabinet Minister. Of course, he joins us in the studio. Morning to you.
Good morning.
The demand on the Prime Minister is what, then?
Well, it comes down to this. It's not just Albanians, but anybody from a safe country, right? But this year we've had 12,000 or so Albanians, a third of all of the would-be asylum seekers, migrants illegal migrants into the country, and then of course they arrive, they apply for asylum, or they make a claim under the human trafficking or modern slavery laws, and they're here for years. It takes 420 days at last count to even get an initial decision for them. So that's paralysing the whole system, and it's unnecessary because Albania is a safe country. You know, asylum's about, let's say, somebody coming from China, escaping the repression that we've just been hearing about. Then that's legitimate. They come here, they say, look, if we stay there, we'll be imprisoned, tortured, murdered, whatever. What's happening with Albania? They're making that claim, but of course it's a safe country. It's in the ECHR. It's got fewer complaints against it than we have.
If it is a safe country, why is it not possible now by government decree to simply say we don't include them in our asylum?
Well, because our laws are not written that way, and a number of people who I've talked to about this said, "Oh, but the the international agreements will stop us." Well, actually, Sweden, in fact, if you go down, I haven't got the shopping list in front of me, but if you go down all the European countries, you'll find apart from one or two, the acceptance rate for asylum is zero. A country like Sweden, for example, very, very well regarded, great human rights record, just doesn't take anybody, effectively gives a summary decision. And we should be able to do the same.
Partly that was a reaction to having taken tens of thousands of Albanians, I think 20 odd years ago, and now reacting to it. Now, what do you say, though, to people who look at the figures and they say, well, lots of Albanians are being granted asylum in Britain. Now, particularly women. It's many fewer men, but if you look at the number of women and children, it's almost 90% of the cases that are being granted asylum.
For women and children, it's about 85%, in fact, that's right. And the reason is actually, frankly, a misinterpretation of the asylum laws by the Home Office. You see, asylum, if you applied for asylum, we'd have to say, properly, we'd say, are you being oppressed by the state? The typical answer comes back, no, I'm being oppressed by local gangsters. Now, that is a job for the Albanian government to do, not for us to sort out a crime problem in Albania, right? So I think that's really what's happening. Frankly, unusually, the Home Office is being overly kindly and insufficiently legislative. Probably the only time in history it's been said. But
now, you're arguing, secondly, as well as automatically refusing asylum, if you have anyone who gets through under the human trafficking laws, that effectively say, well, fine, we'll take you home then.
Yeah, I mean, if your claim is you've been trafficked involuntarily, then surely the simplest common sense solution is to correct that, take you back to your own home. Of course, what this is to a very large extent is they're briefed by the Albanian gangsters. Remember, every one of these people, they may be very decent people themselves, but they're brought here by criminals who brief and say, if you say this, they can't deport you, right? And that's what we're trying to get around that.
Is this a call, a reflection of the fact that the headline policy of the Home Secretary and the Prime Minister, the policy of sending people to Rwanda, is never going to work?
Well, that's my view. That isn't necessarily the view of all the signatories to this letter, remember, and so I've got to distinguish here between my view and theirs. But we've paid 140 million for that so far. The indications are the maximum they could take is 200. You know, we're talking about 12,000 this year alone from Albania alone, 30-odd thousand elsewhere. And the other half of it, to be frank with you, just one point, the other half of it is I want to protect the asylum system for people who really need it. You know, let's say people who've been translators for us in Afghanistan and need to get in, you know. We don't want it destroyed and the public belief in it destroyed by this.
What I think will confuse people listening here is that such an apparently simple solution, though not without controversy, doesn't even appear to have been considered, let alone implemented, by a government that is horribly on the back foot on this issue.
Yeah, well, it's very interesting. I talked to some past Home Secretaries, and they all say the same thing. Oh, it's much more complicated than that, David. Well, actually, I don't think it is. You know, I think we have lived under the misapprehension that the ECHR would stop us doing the first of them, which is having summary decision on asylum, and that people haven't really looked carefully at the consequence of a very recent bit of legislation. Remember, we put in place that legislation. That is the modern slavery legislation.
Very interesting. David Davis, thank you for that. Be interesting to know why it's complicated if it is. September 2021 it was that Sweden took the decision to ban residents of Albania except in special circumstances. Yeah.